we just heard is the opening phrases from Chopin's Nocturne in F minor, Opus 55 number 1. It is considered a late Chopin's Nocturne, which will be very different from the earlier ones that most of our audience may remember the best. For example, Opus 9 number 1. The general feature of this set, Opus 55, is that its texture being more contrapuntal and its structure that surpasses the compositional traditions. Especially Opus 55 number 2 in E flat major, which we will get to it later in this journey. So during this period, Chopin was greatly influenced by J.S. Bach, and he certainly adopted more and more counterpoint writing in the Nocturne, which may surprise the audience for the general impression of this genre. That is, the right hand having a dominant melody, supported by the left hand textures, which usually is an advanced Alberti bass. For the audiences who are not familiar with the term Alberti bass, it is most frequently used in J.C. Bach and Mozart's music, and you will recognize this very quickly. For example, from Mozart's K545 in C major, we can tell this. So this is considered the classical period Alberti bass, which we hear this from Mozart's K545. When we put together the right hand, you will see a dominant melody from the right hand, and then this Alberti bass accompaniment part from the left hand. So the structure of the earlier Chopin Nocturnes is more or less the same. We have an extended Alberti bass that just like this, but more spread out. So for example, Opus 9 number 1. So technically it requires the hand to move a lot more freer, a lot more distance than the steady Mozart Alberti bass. The right hand melody being sentimental, nostalgic, and melancholy is another signature of Chopin's earlier nocturnes, which will sound like this. So when we put these two hands together, it is an advanced or more complex version of Mozart's, left hand Alberti bass, right hand melody. So you can see the similarities between Mozart's melody and accompaniment and Chopin's melody and accompaniment, but instead Chopin's are more complex, more spread out generally. So this is the earlier Chopin's nocturnes which have these features, but later on when we move to the late Chopin's nocturne works, it's a little different. So Chopin gradually moved on from this structure in Opus 55 number 1. We do not have this advanced Alberti bass texture anymore, but instead we have a seventh chord which is spread out into 2 beats. But by this seemingly very easy trick, Chopin created a counter melody against the dominant melody in the right hand that gives us a 3-voice texture. Opus 55 number 2 is even more complex in terms of the counterpoint writing, and it sounds a little more different than Opus 55 number 1. So here is the opening of the Opus 55 number 1 again, and let's just savor how different it is from the earlier nocturnes. So, as I said, the 7th chord being spread out into 2 beats. And then it creates a kind of melody just like this. So when we play the counter melody and the dominant melody, it sounds like this. So we created these three voice textures by simply, spread out the seventh chord into beats, and then this is the first layer, second layer, third layer, so in Opus 55 number 2, it will be a different things, but still Chopin imposed a lot of counterpoint writings, even more explicit counterpoints in the second one, which sound like this. So we will talk about this number 2 in details later in this journey. So I hope these brief introductions can give you some insights into how Chopin was growing differently in this period. I will go into depth with matters of score reading, interpretation and performance practices in the next couple of videos, and I hope that these will help you understand the music from both an audience and a performance perspective. And before I dive into any of the musical details, I want to briefly talk about the editions. As we grew up, the Paderewski is a classical editions that I think many of the performers used. But recently, the Polish National Editions has earned its reputation by its very academic research on some of the Chopin's writing. So in this video, all the score readings and interpretations I will do is from the Polish National Editions, and I encourage all the audiences and students, performers, look into these fantastic versions. And it has many comments and notes about how to perform certain notes, certain trios, and it has a really detailed academic research on this edition. So I hope you can find some insights by this edition.